Good evening. I want to welcome everyone to the Appropriations Committee for the Maryland House of Delegates. This is definitely an historic moment. This is the first time we have ever done our decisions for the budget on Zoom, and you should know that the decision documents are online under the Maryland General Assembly and under appropriations budget decisions. So if you want to pull up the documents and follow along with us, you're certainly able to do that. There are probably a couple of minor changes that'll happen within those documents that the chairs will be discussing as we move along. But I just want to first and foremost thank every member of this Appropriations Committee for the hard work you've done under, very different set of circumstances. We have been meeting jointly with the Senate, our Senate colleagues, and we hope that we're passing a budget this evening, taking it to the floor on Wednesday that will be easily conferenced. We hope that that's the case. Also, I mentioned to you the other day that we're trying to work with, and we are working with the governor of the state of Maryland to look at the $3.9 billion coming from the federal government into our budget, and trying to work collaboratively with the administration. We're in conversation with our Senate counterparts and also with the governor's office about that. I'll talk more about that to the committee, but I want you to know that I'm very hopeful. So let's turn to the FY22 budget for the state of Maryland. And we're going to begin with education and economic development. Chair Barnes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would begin by thanking the members of the subcommittee, Delegate Bridges, Delegate Forbes, Delegate Grice, Delegate Novotny, and of course our amazing Vice Chair, Delegate Solomon. We also have an outstanding committee staff assigned to EED, Michelle Lambert, thank you very much, and our dedicated budget analysts, Sarah Baker, Patrick Frank, Andrew Gray, Emily Haskell, Laura Hyde, Ian Klein, Nicholas Konzelman, Samuel Quist, Rebecca Ruff, Ann Wagner, and also Keisha Walia, who edited this document. Thank you all very much, especially during this COVID times and keeping us on task and moving along. Now, getting into the document, beginning with the Department of Labor on page 1, the subcommittee restricted funds, and supplemental number 2, fiscal 21 deficiency appropriation for the Maryland Stem Cell Research Fund. For the Maryland State Department of Education MSDE headquarters, which begins on page 2 and continues through page 5, the subcommittee adopted 6 pieces of narrative, requesting reports on Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program, agency accounting practices, state actions related to remote learning during COVID-19 pandemic, and CARES Act expenditures on administrative costs, reopening schools, and competitive innovative grants. There's the Blueprint for Maryland's Future grant program funding for early childhood programs, and also forecasting for the Child Care Scholars Program. On page 6 for MSDE Aid to Education, the subcommittee deleted $3 million in federal funds as this was a technical correction for an expired grant. On page 6, the subcommittee restricted funds from the non-public placement program in order to provide a grant to CBF. On page 7 through 11, the subcommittee adopted 7 pieces of narrative requesting reports on the non-public placement program, federal grants to local school systems for COVID-19 expenditures, enrollment and costs for the PTEC program, Medicaid claims for school-based health services, child care reopening, and the Child Scholarship Program, closeout report on the Blueprint program, and copyrighted and unrestricted or open source material for use in supplemental tutoring. Beginning on page 11 and continuing through page 14, the MSDE funding for educational organizations, the subcommittee adopted 4 items that restored language from previous budget bills in the Aid to Non-Public Schools program in order to modify the funding, require participating schools to comply with state non-discrimination policies, submit a student handbook, and specify participation requirements. Turning to the Boost program on page 14 and continuing through page 18, the committee adopted 2 items that restored language from previous budgets, I think at least the last 3 budgets, in order to specify priorities for boost scholarship awards, require a report, designate funds for special education students, and specify that a boost student or a sibling of a boost student may only receive boost award in the current school year if they received an award in the previous school year. On page 19, the subcommittee reduced funding for boost. Also on 19, the subcommittee adopted committee narrative on the governor's energy education relief funding for non-public schools. On page 20 and continuing through page 22.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, before we continue to move forward, I just have one quick question about these items that we didn't necessarily agree with. Do we want to do that at the very end of your presentation? We can do it as we go along.
Let's hold questions till the end, and then we can do them all in the end. Okay.
All right, very good. Thank you.
On page 20 and continuing through page 22, the Interagency Committee on School Construction, the subcommittee restricted funds pending a report on the statewide facilities assessment, restricted funds from MSDE to fill vacant positions at IAC, and submit a personnel report, and adopt narrative requesting a status update on the Integrated Master Facilities Assessment Library. For Morgan State, on page 23, the subcommittee restricted funds pending receipt of a report on the Center for Urban Health Equity. On page 24, the University of Maryland System Office, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting reports on the status of implementing the recommendations related to the universities at Shady Grove. For the Maryland Higher Education Commission, beginning on page 25 and continuing through page 28, the subcommittee adopted 8 pieces of narrative requesting reports on progress toward 55% completion goal, financial aid data by expected family contribution, assessment tools, and students with chronic health issues, workforce shortage assistant grants, impact of the credit completion requirement on financial aid awards, the Next Gen Scholars, and transition to the Student Aid Index. On page 29 and 30 for the state support for higher ed, the Morgan State University action is a technical item and was adopted previously above, as mentioned. The subcommittee also adopted narrative requesting report on instructional faculty workload, as well as a report on standardized tests. For BCCC, on page 31 and 32, the subcommittee adopted 3 pieces of narrative. First, a report providing an update on institutional realignment. Second, a report on enrollment and the Mayor's Scholars Program. And finally, a report on IT infrastructure renovations. In the Department of Commerce, on page 33 and 34, the subcommittee adopted 3 pieces of narrative, including a report on employee stock ownership, a report on restaurant and hotel relief programs, and a report on loans to childcare providers. On page 35, in the Maryland Technology Development Corporation, the subcommittee increased the negative fiscal 21 deficiency appropriation to correct for funds unintentionally released during fiscal 20. In the back of the bill section, it shows on page 36, the subcommittee restricted funds until a report is submitted verifying the separate budget code has been created for the Universities of Shady Grove pursuant to prior legislation passed on that issue. The subcommittee's BRFA actions are found on page 37 and 38. Beginning on page 37, the subcommittee adopted BRFA item 2, altering the allowable uses for Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund for one-time grants to local school systems to address enrollment declines. The subcommittee also adopted BRFA item 2 DLS alt, altering the allowable uses of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future for items in the supplemental budget. The subcommittee rejected BRFA item 3 that would have rebased and altered CADE. We've restored full CADE funding in that regard. The committee also restored full Salinger funding and rejected the rebase in that program. Subcommittee rejected BRFA item 5 that would have required unused senatorial and adult scholarships be transferred to need-based student financial aid fund. Subcommittee adopted BRFA item 6, repealing the mandate for the Maryland Loan Assistance Repayment Program for foster care recipients. The subcommittee rejected BRFA item 7 that would have repealed the mandate for funding for the Maryland Public Broadcasting Commission. Subcommittee rejected BRFA item 16 that would level funded Maryland State's Art Council, as well as alter the rate of increase for future years. Subcommittee adopted BRFA item 19, authorizing the transfer of marketplace facility revenues from the Blueprint Fund for Maryland's Future to the Education Trust Fund. The subcommittee adopted BRFA item 32 that requires maintenance of effort from local school systems in order to be eligible for one-time grants. Moving to page 38, the subcommittee adopted BRFA item 103 DLS additional, which requires MSDE to revert $235,000 in General funds due to an improper encumbrance. Subcommittee adopted BRFA item 111 DLS additional that reduces fiscal 2020 spending in the non-placement public placement program. The subcommittee adopted BRFA item 301 app additional that absolves the Maryland Stadium Authority of doing tax impact studies for the convention centers and Hippodrome in fiscal 21, given the pandemic. Finally, the subcommittee adopted BRFA item 302 app additional that provides revenues from raffles for the Michael E. Bush Sports Fund. With that, we would move the committee report.
Second. Okay. Delegate Grice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have the page numbers actually in front of me here, but Mr. Chairman,
You gave me.
find them. Yeah, we had two items in our subcommittee that we wanted to pull out and actually vote on separately. One was boost, and the second one had to do with the stem cell piece.
So page 1, supplemental.
I think there were two line items in that section, if I can recall. One was a color page item, and I believe another one.
So on the changes to the boost funding and also on the stem cell, use of stem cell,
Yes, that's correct.
what was that? Delegate Barnes, the stem
Yep.
cell.
It was a typo. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
The stem cell program has been funded in the state for several years. We all know the great research being done on Alzheimer's and so many other diseases facing our citizens that's being done with the stem cell research. This year, the governor made a cut of $1 million to the program. This would fence off and restore the $1 million.
I've got it. Okay. Delegate Grice, there's a couple of other hands up. Could I take those?
Absolutely. Sure.
Back to the, is that's all right. So those are two items that Delegate Grice has requested we pull out and vote independent of the full budget, the full report. All right, Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Chair of the Education Subcommittee, I apologize. I know this comes up every year. I don't know if I had clarification. Is it embryonic stem cells or just the traditional stem cells used in research?
I don't know the answer to that question. It's the same, whatever program, you seem probably more familiar with the stem cell program than I am, whatever the program has been for these many years.
It's continuing. Thank you.
Delegate Kettleman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question, and I don't know if there's a provision in the document, but is there some way to put in language that asks the University of Maryland at College Park something about their salaries? And when they publish the salaries, the high salaries of all of the employees at state, the first 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 15 pages were all members of the College Park campus, and there were a lot of 200,000s, and it wasn't just coaches and things. And I'm sure that professors are important, but it just seems to me that as a state university that the salaries seemed very high, and perhaps we would like to have them or get some sort of study to make sure that they are not out of line. Is that something we can do with the budget?
I think it's a great point, Delegate. I think that what you should understand, though, is that the subcommittee does a tremendous amount of oversight, just as your subcommittee does on transportation, on our salaries at our universities, making sure they are in line with other universities. And if they weren't, we would certainly take action. And so this is something that I can continue to talk with you offline. We can continue to share with you. But trust me when I say that we have a tremendous amount of oversight over the salaries, and not just the University of Maryland, all our public institutions in the state. So I don't think we need to do any budget language here, but we are going to continue that oversight. We will be earnest in it, and I'm going to make sure that we follow up with you to make sure that all your concerns are addressed.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I might add, I think just in recent years, we forced a bonus to be given back. Is that correct? Where there was a payout to a chancellor and we forced the issue and got some money back. But, you know,
We did.
we along, 2 decades ago more, designated University of Maryland at College Park to be the flagship campus for the system. And as the flagship campus, we also very much emphasized its role in research and so on and so forth, and tried to increase its viability and visibility nationally. And it's done that, by the way. It is viewed as one of the premier research universities in the country. And when you do that, you get into a category of competition with other universities like Duke, like University of Washington at St. Louis, like Stanford. So they compete for faculty and they compete for chairs of departments across the country. I hear you. I do know that this subcommittee has not only presently but in the past been vigilant about making sure that public dollars were spent wisely for the public good and for Maryland students as well. But I thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Okay, we have now two items that we want to vote on separately. So we're going to pull those out of the report. Can we vote first on the full report minus those 2 items? Okay, we had a motion favorable and a second on the report minus the items on boost and stem cell. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Anyone opposed to the report? Very good. And I congratulate the chair and the vice chair and all the members of the subcommittee on a great report. You did a great job. Now let's turn to boost. The subcommittee's language, the subcommittee's recommendation is the same recommendation that we've had for the last 2 years, as I recall. And Chairman Barnes, you can certainly correct me if I go astray here.
Absolutely correct.
It is not to end the program. It is to, in fact, close the program to new members other than siblings and people who are already moving through the program. This program would last another 12 years. It's the same action that we have taken on the House side for the last 2 years. And I support strongly what the subcommittee recommendation is. We take this particular stance to the conference committee. And, in the last few years, we've come up with a different approach. But I would say to you that I think sticking with the House perspective on this is a very important thing to do. Until we are certain that all of the schools that are involved are not discriminating for any reason, and there have been issues that have surfaced, we want to make sure that we limit, I think, and over the long term, eliminate this program. So with that, what I'll do is I'll take a vote. Those of you who are in favor of the subcommittee language, which does not eliminate immediately the program, but does over a long term eliminate the program. Am I correct, Delegate Barnes?
Absolutely.
But does not harm anyone in the program or a sibling, as I recall. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Delegate Valentino Smith, you have a question before we vote?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, it's not a surprise. I support the program, but I just want to clarify. I'm trying to read the language quickly. It means that no new students can enter the program. Is that correct? Only if sibling in the school. So no new families and no first-time new students.
Correct.
Yep,
Okay.
same as we've done, really, I think the last 3 years, actually, at least 2 years.
And the discrimination language, though, is
Same language.
clearly in there. I support the discrimination language, just not the phase out. Thank you.
Okay. All those in favor of the subcommittee's report and language, please put up a yellow or blue hand. And I have to learn how to do that.
I've never done it up there. There we go.
Wait a minute. Raise hand, I got it. Okay, all those in support of the subcommittee, please raise your hand. I'm waiting on the staff to get the count, okay? When you have the count, please let me know.
Madam Chair, my hand raising function isn't working, but I'd like to be recorded as raising my hand.
Okay,
Thank you.
did you hear that, Cherie? Everybody get that?
Yes,
Yes,
Dina.
ma'am, we got it.
Okay, now we're gonna do opposed, okay? All right, so everybody lower your hand. Who needs to lower their hand? Let's get everybody. And we're gonna, Gabe, you need to lower your hand. Proctor, can't vote twice, different way.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And if I can, I'd like to explain my vote at the end.
Sure. Let's get everybody squared away. Okay, Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the respect of the chair and the chair of the committee on this issue. I just want to be clear that I fully support the committee and the House's position to require that all participating schools agree that they will not discriminate in student admissions, retention, or expulsion, or otherwise discriminate against any student. And that I do support that they can't discriminate in any fashion, and that the state be allowed to claw back or take back money if there's issues that a school has done that. However, in my district, and I believe now that we've passed so much in education funding that the concerns that it would interfere with formula funding to the public schools is really no longer a concern because of what we will be doing for the public schools. So in my district, this scholarship serves more minority kids than many other scholarships in my district, and it serves those that are needy. And it gives them the opportunity to participate in programs that they will not have available to them for many, many years yet as we start to improve upon the blueprint. It allows them to participate in athletics, in sports, and in music, and also some learning disabled programs that exist in the private schools. And so because I hope and believe that it's not discriminatory, and if it does, the money's taken back, and that it helps so many minority students that otherwise have no opportunities. I know in Baltimore City, students can sometimes select to go to Poly and City and some others, and in other districts, there's things like College Park Academy in schools. In my district, they don't have that. And so with that, I do not like to disagree with you, Madam Chair and Subcommittee Chair, but it's important that I just explain that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, obviously the motion to remove or to all, the motion was to favor the subcommittee language, and that passed. Thank you, everybody. I do want to mention something, by the way, just as an aside. I don't know if all of you saw the New York Times article this weekend about the incredible amount of money that's coming through, and we saw it in our state, and more will come for private schools. And from the CARES Act, and now from Congress, the bill they just passed last week, apparently there's a great deal of money flowing to the non-public schools from the federal government. And you might, those of you who have non-public schools in your district, and you might talk to them about the opportunity there. Okay, the next item we need to take up is an item that would support the subcommittee by restoring funding for the stem cell program. Delegate Barnes, is this money that's general fund money or is it special fund? It's special fund, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. Comes out of cigarette restitution?
No, this is general fund. This is
General fund. Okay,
this is unallocated interest payments at UI that was for fiscal 21, which they don't have an interest payment due. Really, we could take 15 million of this in any other budget year. We probably would, because we would need it to restore community college money or something. But what'll happen to the other 14 million is it'll just roll over into the general fund anyway. So we're just redirecting 1 million of that 15 to the stem cell to restore that fenced off.
all right, thank you. And the stem cell program, again, I'm going to just speak to it briefly. I'll let the subcommittee chair also speak to it. You know, it's been a very successful program, very successful use of the money here in the state of Maryland. And, you know, I draw from my former employment at Johns Hopkins University, where I know that this funding at University of Maryland and at Johns Hopkins has been used to really find cures and treatments for diseases, in particular, diabetes and many other important discoveries that have been made. Cancer,
Heart failure, Parkinson's.
right. It's very important. So anyway, I understand why there are those who oppose it, but I also understand that we need this research, and we have been a leader in the country on stem cell research. So those who are in favor of the supporting the subcommittee on this, please raise your hand. Kathy, you got your hand up now. Okay, I just want to give the staff time to get the count. Let me know when you have the count.
I've got it.
Okay, let's take our hands down. Those who are opposed to the subcommittee language, please, everybody get your hands down. Can't vote twice. All right, put your hands up. And when you get that count, let me know. Okay,
Yeah, we have that one as well.
very good. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank you for pulling these things out. Are there any other items? I don't think so. We have accepted the report, and you've done a great job, the subcommittee. So we're now going to move to health, the health subcommittee. Delegate Resnick, here you go.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to present the report of the Health and Social Services Subcommittee. I will predicate it on saying that my computer keeps telling me that my connection is unstable. I'm assuming that's referring to Wi-Fi and not my personality. So if I do freeze, please give me a second and I will pop back eventually. So with that, happy to present the report from the Health and Social Services Subcommittee. Very first, I'd obviously like to thank my subcommittee members, the Vice Chair, Geraldine Valentino-Smith, Delegate Shanika Henson, Delegate Nino Mangione, and Delegate Pat Young. Our very able committee staff, June Chung, who is new to us this year, but you'd never know it. She took right to it and has been incredibly helpful to us. Our incredible budget analysts, Andrew Garrison, Emily Haskell, Grace Pedersen, Simon Powell, Sam Quist, Ann Wagner, and Tanya Zimmerman. And of course, would also like to thank Madeline Ross, who helped edit the report. On page 1 is the Office of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. The subcommittee adopted narrative requesting sign language interpreter complaint data. On page 2, in the Department of Disabilities, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting an update on the statewide IT accessibility initiative. In the Department of Aging, beginning on page 3 and continuing to page 6, the subcommittee did several things. We adopted language requesting data on the department's wait list and new programs, adopted narrative requesting information on the adequacy of affordable senior housing, restricted funds to reduce wait lists and other state programs, level funded the Communities for Life program, and adopted narrative on the department's coordination of durable medical equipment donations. In the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights on page 7, the subcommittee narrative requested an update on open cases and case processing times. In the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange on pages 8 and 9, the subcommittee adopted 3 pieces of subcommittee narrative, including a notification request of an application or decision on state innovation waivers, options for addressing healthcare needs for those unable to enroll in Medicaid or qualified health plans, and reinsurance program costs and forecasts. Now turning to the Department of Health, beginning on page 10 and 11, the subcommittee added 2 pieces of language to the Office of the Secretary's budget, requiring reports on the Behavioral Health Administration Service Organization reconciliation process and a mass vaccination site in Montgomery County. On page 12, the subcommittee also added language requiring a report on vacancies throughout the health department. In the Health Professional Boards and Commissions on page 13, the subcommittee adopted narrative on the board's major IT project. On page 14, in the Public Health Administration, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a report on staffing and recruitment for public health personnel. In the Prevention and Health Promotion Administration, and I always say this, it's my favorite acronym, FIPA. On page 15, the subcommittee restricted funds for a grant to the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and adopted narrative requesting a report on education and outreach programs related to diabetes. In the Behavioral Health Administration, beginning on page 16, the committee added language requiring a report on psychiatric rehabilitation programs and added narrative for ongoing reporting on the new Administrative Services Organization, which continues on to page 17. Below and continuing to page 18, the subcommittee added 2 pieces of annual language and a contingent reduction. In the Department of Disabilities, in the Developmental Disabilities Administration, starting on page 19, the subcommittee added language restricting funds pending a report on the LTSS transition. On pages 20 and 21, the subcommittee adopted narrative on DDA's state facility performance measures, added language restricting funds in the Community Services Program to that purpose, and reduced general funds in fiscal 2022 due to the continuation of an enhanced federal match. In Medicaid, beginning on page 22, the subcommittee added annual budget language and cut $331 million in general funds based on available special and federal funds and expenditure trends. On page 23, the subcommittee adopted a technical amendment and narrative on MCO risk corridor settlements. On page 24, we adopted narrative on waiver expansion and a collaborative care pilot. Also on this page and continuing to the next, we cut $112 million in fiscal 2021 general funds based on federal fund availability and expenditure trends and added restrictive language. On page 26 and 27, pertaining to the Medicaid behavioral health, the subcommittee added annual language, restricted funds pending a report on institutions for mental disease, and cut $35 million in general funds due to availability of additional federal fund match. Below the reduction on page 27, we adopted a technical amendment. On page 28 in the Health Regulatory Commissions, the subcommittee added narrative on the Maryland Primary Care Program and adopted a technical amendment. Now turning to the Department of Human Services, which begins on page 29, the subcommittee added language reducing funds to reflect a reversion that should have occurred in fiscal 2020. In the Department of Human Services Administration budget on page 30, the subcommittee adopted annual language restricting funds for the Maryland Legal Services Program to that purpose. In the Social Services Administration, the subcommittee restricted funds pending a report on hospital stays for youth in DHS custody, which begins on page 31 and continues to the following page. Below on page 32, we adopted narrative requesting information on the status of implementation of activities related to the Families First Prevention Services Act. In the Office of Technology for Human Services on page 33 and 34, the subcommittee added 2 pieces of narrative on the MD Think project. For the foster care maintenance, payments, and child welfare services programs on page 35 and continuing to the next page, the subcommittee added annual language to foster care maintenance, payments, and adopted 2 pieces of narrative, one on the implementation of the new foster care rate structure and the other on foster youth savings programs. Below on page 36 and continuing on page 37, we deleted a general fund deficiency due to sufficient funding for that purpose. Following on page 38 and 37 and 38, the subcommittee added annual language to both the supplemental budget for foster care maintenance payments and for child welfare service programs. On the bottom of page 38, continuing to 40, we adopted 2 pieces of narrative on child welfare caseloads and planning for a workload study. Beginning on page 40 and continuing to page 45, for the Assistance Payments Program and the Child Support Administration, the subcommittee adopted 8 pieces of narrative on topics including the reasons for case closure in public benefits programs, the Summer SNAP for Children program, the PEBT spending, application processing times and reasons for denial for public benefit programs, reducing the benefit cliff in public benefit programs, child support service program reports, performance measures for child support cases, and child support state enforcement measures. In the Family Investment Administration and the Office of Home Energy Programs on pages 46 through 48, the subcommittee adopted 4 pieces of narrative on adding SNAP employment and training program performance measures to annual budget submissions, the ability to use TANF for non-state entities providing case management and services, energy assistance application times and denials, and implementation of program changes for energy assistance. In the Department of Housing and Community Development on page 49, the subcommittee adopted 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports on the construction of an educational broadband network and a report on residential feedback in low-income housing tax credit compliance monitoring. Beginning on page 50 and continuing to page 54, the subcommittee added 4 sections to the back of the bill. Section 38 restricts funds from DHS, DO-IT, and DBM pending a report on MD Think project costs. Section 43 restricts funds from DHS and MDH pending a report on voluntary placement agreements. Section 44 restricts funds from various state agencies pending a report on coordinating public benefit applications. And Section 46 restricts funds from the Maryland Department of Aging and MDH pending a report on the development of a cognitive health plan for the state's aging population. Now I'd like to turn to the BRFA and the BRFA actions for the subcommittee on pages 55 through 56. We rejected item 8 and adopted item 8 DLS Alt to lower funding for the senior prescription drug program based on available funds and increase funding available to the Community Health Resources Commission. The subcommittee modified item 9 to transfer funds from a provider assessment to Medicaid in only fiscal 2021 and 2022 and adopted a technical amendment, item 9 tech. The subcommittee also adopted item 10 to lower the mandate for the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange. With regard to the medical health deficit assessment, we are actually making a change from what is in the on the page, and we will not be taking a cut to the medical deficit assessment beginning fiscal 2021. The subcommittee also modified item 25, which limits certain provider rate increases, but altered the date for which the increase is compared. The subcommittee rejected item 26 and adopted item 26 DLS Alt to strike a fund balance transfer from the State Board of Pharmacy. For items 27 and 28, also a change. The subcommittee adopted authorized transfers in the totaling of $5 million from surplus special funds, including the Board of Professional Counselors and Therapists of a $2 million transfer, and the Maryland Cannabis Commission to the Behavioral Health Administration of $3 million. Both transfers went to the Behavioral Health Administration. The subcommittee also adopted items 101, DLS additional, authorizing an additional $700,000 transfer from the Board of Psychologists special fund to the Behavioral Health Administration. The subcommittee adopted item 109, DLS additional, recognizing a planned revision to the fiscal 2020 behavioral health reimbursement accrual, behavioral health provider reimbursement accrual by $5 million in general funds due to excessive funds accrued at fiscal 2020 closeout. And finally, the last item dealing with DDA funding, we also made a change from what is in on page on that item, and the subcommittee chose not to reduce the general fund spending by 16.8 million, despite recognizing a potential federal matching funds in 2020. I move the adoption of the subcommittee report and the actions on the BRFA.
Okay, second. Okay. Are there any items that we want to vote on separately?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I was, based on conversation with the Secretary and Department of Aging, I was going to ask to vote on two issues with the Department of Aging. One that restricted the language or the language that restricted funding pending the receipt of two of the reports. I think it was the first decision mentioned from the Department of Aging. And I was going to ask to the cuts for the Community for Life program. Those were two with my discussions that I was going to oppose. Thank you.
You can oppose them. Do you want to vote on, have the whole committee vote on them separately? Because
No, well, no, that's fine. I'm just going to make the opposition unless.
well, yeah, we'll pull them out and we'll
Thank
vote
you.
on them separately. And that way you can show that you have opposed them. These are, by the way, she served in the Senate, and the Senate usually looks out after the Department of Aging. But I certainly support the subcommittee. All right, so let's move on this report. We got a motion second and a second, minus those two items that impact the Office on Aging. We'll vote on those separately, okay? All those in favor of the report signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Very good. All right, on the two items, if you could, Delegate Resnick, just state the two items that we want to have a separate vote on for the Department of Aging.
Sure. If Delegate Mangina can remind me which language is a couple pieces of restricted funds. So is it the first?
Yeah, I believe it was the first, the $100,000 into pending the reports. That and the funding, I think it was 300,000. Is that correct for the
Communities of Life? So
for life? Yes.
Yes, the first item is just restricted funds. We're not cutting them. We're just restricting $100,000. Awaiting data from the department on the status of their wait lists. They have a number of waitlisted programs with people waiting for services and a number of new programs coming on. So we are just asking for some data on that. $100,000. Admittedly, it's not a large department, but it is still not a lot of money to hold for such a request. And then for the second program, Communities of Life program, it's a great program. We are level funding it. They had asked for an additional $300,000. Both DLS and the subcommittee just did not see a need for that additional money. There was no historic trend in upward spending on that program. So we decided to cut that money. If they need it next year, we can relook at the issue.
Okay, well, why don't we do the first one first? And I move favorable. I move to support the subcommittee report. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 18 in the affirmative and we're ready for the opposition.
All those in opposition, please raise your hand. Everybody else, take your hand down. Okay,
Right, we have in the opposition Novotny, Mangione, and Kittleman and Griced.
very good. And on the second, which has to do with the 300,000,
300,000 cut from the request from the governor's budget for the Community of Life program. Yes.
absolutely. All right. I would move in favor of retaining the subcommittee recommendation. So everybody raise your hand for retaining the recommendation of the subcommittee.
We have 16 in the affirmative.
Okay, everybody lower your hand, and those who oppose. I think, yeah. Delegate Resnick, you need to lower your hand, I bet you.
All right. God. There it goes.
We got them?
Yes, ma'am. We have in the opposition Metzger, Novotny, Mangione, Griced, Kittleman, and McKay.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. And to the subcommittee chair and vice chair and members, again, you did a great job. And June it was a wonderful addition this year, so we're happy to have her. I'll thank staff at the end of this, but I just thought I'd call her out since she was brand new. All right, we're now going to move to PSA. Delegate Subcommittee Chair Haynes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the Appropriations Committee. I would first like to begin by thanking the subcommittee members, the Vice Chair of the subcommittee, Delegate Proctor, and Delegates Esavera and McKay. All are veterans to the subcommittee and bring a tremendous wealth of knowledge to the issues that we are continually working on an annual basis. I would also like to thank our committee staff, Mr. Ken Weaver, and also the committee support of Ms. Cherie Werheim. Ken, as you may know, is new to the subcommittee as staff, and he never skipped a beat and kept us on task and on track, as well as our committee support staff, Ms. Werheim. I would also like to thank the DLS budget analysts. They are the following: Mr. Jacob Cash, Mr. Patrick Frank, Mr. Andrew Garrison, Mr. Nicholas Konzelman, Mr. Jason Kramer, Mr. Steve McCullough, Ms. Madeline Miller, Ms. Grace Pedersen, Mr. Sanya Quist, and Mr. Caleb Wise, and also Mr. Brett Ogden, who edited this particular document. We're going to jump right into the decisions of the subcommittee and begin on page 1. For the judiciary, the subcommittee adopted 3 pieces of budget bill language, cutting money for a turnover adjustment, a 2% general salary increase, and a 3.5 merit increase. On page 2, for the judiciary, the subcommittee adopted 2 pieces of budget bill language, one restricting money for the implementation of DeWolf versus Richmond, and the other pending a report on continuing legal education. On pages 3 and 4 for the judiciary, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting 4 reports on the following topics. They are as follows: 1, the appointed attorney program; 2, major IT development; 3, judgeship needs; and 4, court performance measures. On page 5, shifting to the Office of the Public Defender, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a comparison report on public defender compensation in Maryland and nearby jurisdictions, and requesting an evaluation of the agency's workload reduction pilot program. On page 6, for the Board of Public Works, the subcommittee adopted annual narrative requiring financial and attendance data from the Maryland Zoo in Baltimore. On page 7, for the boards, commissions, and offices, The subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a report on small and minority business liaison vacancies and responsibilities. On page 8 for the boards, commissions, and offices, the subcommittee also adopted narrative requesting a survey of agencies' activities to encourage MBE participation. Turning to page 10 for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services, the subcommittee authorized the reclassification of 2 positions to address staffing shortages related to grant oversight. Also, beginning on page 10, for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services, the subcommittee adopted language related to Victims of Crime Act funding. This language establishes a mechanism for reducing funds to victim service providers should federal funding be reduced, and expresses intent that providers be funded at a level equal to that of fiscal 2020. The language also establishes a comprehensive reporting requirement to provide information related to VOCA awards, continuity of services, and expenditures. On page 14 for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services, the subcommittee adopted language to restrict funds pending submission of an independent audit of GOCPYVS, which is the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services, fiscal management and grant oversight practices. If you will turn to page 15 for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services, the subcommittee adopted committee narrative requesting updates to the implementation of Baltimore City's comprehensive 5-year crime strategy. At the bottom of page 15, for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services, the subcommittee adopted language to swap general funds with special funds in the Violent Intervention and Prevention Program, generating $1.7 million in general fund savings. Turning to the Military Department, which begins at page 16, the subcommittee adopted 2 pieces of committee narrative. The first requests information regarding the impact of COVID-19 on the Free State Challenge Academy for at-risk youth. And the second requests information regarding the allocation of the William H. Amos Fire, Rescue, and Ambulance Fund and the application of the maintenance of those maintenance of efforts requirements. Turning to the Comptroller of Maryland, which begins on page 18, the subcommittee increased the turnover rate to 7.75% and reduced general and special funding accordingly. On page 19 for the Comptroller of Maryland, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting a report on the status of the integrated tax system, major IT development project. On page 20, for the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting data on property tax lien sales held during calendar 2021. If you go to the bottom of page 20, for the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting additional information on staffing in the Real Property Valuation Division. On the page 22, for the Department of Information Technology, the subcommittee adopted narrative requiring a cybersecurity report. Turning to the Department of General Services, which begins on page 23, the subcommittee adopted narrative requiring a report on remote work and anticipated office space needs. Pages 24 through 25 for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. The subcommittee adopted narrative requesting 3 reports on the following: the Justice Reinvestment Act, position abolishment and reclassifications, and recidivism. On page 26, for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted language that restricts $2.8 million across the department in order to maintain operations of the Eastern and Southern Maryland pre-release units. On the bottom of page 26, for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted a narrative that requests a report on Maryland Correctional Enterprises programs, sales, employment, and progress on audit findings. And on page 27 for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted language that restricts $200,000 for quarterly reports showing the number of employees hired and separated from the department by category. On page 28 for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted language that expressed legislative intent to create a new senior drinking driver monitor position and restricts $100,000 for a report on a new senior monitor classification. On page 29 for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted narrative that requests a report breaking down parole, probation, and drinking driver monitor caseloads by region and supervision level. On page 30, for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted language that restricts $7.1 million for substance use disorder treatment programs so that the appropriation can only be used in those programs. On the bottom of page 30, for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted language that restricts $500,000 for a report on the renegotiation of the agreement with the U.S. Marshals Service to operate Chesapeake Detention Facility. On page 31, for the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, the subcommittee adopted language that restricts $100,000 for a report providing information on substance use disorder treatment services in the Baltimore City Medication-Assisted Treatment Pilot Program. On page 33, for the Department of Juvenile Services, the subcommittee adopted language restricting funds pending submission of a one-year update to the Department of Juvenile Services Baltimore City Strategic Partnership. And on page 34, the subcommittee rejected the DLS recommendation. On the bottom of page 34, on page 34, as I previously mentioned, that is for the Department of State Police. So let me just rephrase that a little differently. On page 34, for the Department of State Police, the subcommittee rejected the DLS recommendation. On the bottom of page 34, for the Department of State Police, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting information regarding the implementation of the National Incident-Based Reporting System. On page 36, for the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, the subcommittee adopted annual language restricting funds pending submission of the out-of-home placements report. And starting at the bottom of page 37, for the Department of Police, the subcommittee adopted annual language restricting funds pending the submission of the 2020 Uniform Crime Report. And starting at the bottom of page 38, for the Uninsured Employers Fund, the subcommittee adopted language restricting funds in several agencies pending a report from the Uninsured Employers Fund. There is also an additional action that the subcommittee took related to the Budget Reconciliation Financing Act, which is known as the BRFA. That item can be shown on page 40. The subcommittee adopted the following. Item 105-DLS additional, which authorizes a transfer of $1 million from the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Fund to the general fund in fiscal 2022. Madam Chair, I move the adoption of the subcommittee report and the actions on the BRFA.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to you. and the vice
Thank you,
chair
Madam Chair.
and members of the committee. Is there any discussion on this report? Delegate Wendell Beitzel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On your last item on the Charlotte Hall veterans, taking the money from that and putting in a general fund, could you explain that a little more fully?
Yes. Let me just get to the correct page, but I can
It
tell
was
you,
the last page, the last item,
yeah, I can just tell you off the top.
BRFA item.
Yeah, but I can tell you just by the knowledge that I have is that there are special funds that are available through federal funds, through special funds, which has been accumulating over time. And so in order to increase the fund balance, BRFA basically taps into that particular special fund, which is actually paid by the contractor that provides services at Charlotte Hall. And that fund has just been sitting there generating a pot of money, basically. And so the BRFA basically makes a transfer for $1 million from the Charlotte Hall Fund to the general fund. We also looked at DLS. We double checked to make sure that it would not affect any operations, anything that is going on with Charlotte Hall. So it's a mechanism that will allow us to increase the fund balance with the balance that we're looking to increase, as opposed to using those special funds.
What was Secretary Owens and anyone from that Department of Veterans Affairs, are they aware of this and did they object to it?
Well, I can tell you that the analysts may actually have more insight on whether or not that they had any objections, but if my memory serves me correctly, I think they disagreed with with the swap.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't affect their operations, and I did not hear from them, nor did the subcommittee hear from them when we reported publicly in the subcommittee decisions.
Madam Chair, may we pull that out for a separate vote?
Yes, we may. Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, any other areas of concern? We'll pull that one item out. I'd like to move to accept the report. Good report. And we'll hold out the Charlotte Hall item. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed to the report, knowing that we're pulling out the Charlotte Hall? Opposed to the report? Okay, none. All right, on the Charlotte Hall swap, you've heard the subcommittee chair say that this is a swap of money that does not affect operations. And something that is we typically do. So I will make the motion to support the subcommittee on this particular item. So those in favor of supporting the subcommittee by keeping the swap, please raise your hand. And keep it raised till we get the count, please.
Yes, ma'am, we have 15 in the affirmative.
Okay, let's put our hands down. Those who are opposed to the fund swap, please raise your hand. Let's let the staff get the count.
Yes, ma'am, we have Novotny, Beitzel, Kittleman, Mangione, Greist, and Metzger in the opposition.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you again to the subcommittee for your fine work.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We're going to now move to Transportation and Environment. Chairman Gorman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to be with you all to present the report of the Transportation and the Environment Subcommittee. Of course, I'd like to start by thanking the other members of the subcommittee, my Vice Chair, Delegate Krim, our senior member, Delegate Beitzel, Delegate Kittleman, our newest member, Delegate Lewis, Delegate Metzger, and of course, Vice Chair Chang, who was really our sixth man on the court this year, helping us out through our bills and through our budget decisions. So thank you all. I'd also like to thank our committee staff, Ken Weaver, who, as Chair Haynes mentioned, was new to the committee and picked up really quickly this year. And of course, committee support from Cherie Wareheim. And to thank all our DLS budget analysts, Andrew Gray, Emily Haskell, Steve McCulloch, who's also our coordinator, Caleb Weiss, Tanya Zimmerman, and Katie Lee Cannon, who edited the report. Turning now to the recommendations of the subcommittee. On page 1 for the Public Service Commission, the subcommittee adopted committee narrative requesting a report on the consumer choice websites. On page 2 for the Office of the People's Counsel, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting an evaluation of the cap on assessments supporting the agency. For the Maryland Energy Administration, on pages 3 through 5, the subcommittee added language restricting a portion of the Maryland gas expansion funds to be used for energy assistance and adopted 3 pieces of committee narrative requesting reports on Strategic Energy Investment Fund or SEIF expenditures, Maryland Gas Expansion Fund grants, and electric vehicle recharging equipment rebates. The subcommittee took up the Department of Planning, and I'd like to make a minor modification for what's in the printed document and reject the deletion of a long-term vacant position in the Department of Planning. After talking to the department and some of the subcommittee members, we'd asked the committee to retain the long-term vacant position on page 6. And in lottery on page 7, we reduced the advertising budget for the lottery. Action pertaining to the Maryland Department of Transportation begins on page 8. On pages 8 through 10, the subcommittee added annual language requiring notification of changes to the capital program and establishing a position cap for the department. In the Secretary's office on pages 11 through 14, the subcommittee added language restricting funds pending reports on the procurement to replace the design build contractor on the Purple Line and on sworn officer position information in the Maryland Transit Administration Police Force. The subcommittee also added annual language restricting spending for operating grants and aids to the amount in the budget as submitted and requiring notification of changes to the capital program. On pages 15 through 17, the Maryland Department of Transportation debt service requirements, the subcommittee added 3 pieces of annual language establishing debt limits for traditional and non-traditional debt and requiring a report on non-traditional debt issuances. On pages 18 and 19, in the State Highway Administration, the subcommittee added language indicating intent and adopted 3 pieces of narrative, requesting reports on road construction worker safety, best practices in the installation of suicide barriers on bridges, and signage for certain types of tourism. On page 20, for the Motor Vehicle Administration, the subcommittee adopted narrative requesting reports on Real ID implementation. And on page 21, in the Maryland Transit Administration, the subcommittee restricted funds pending a report on non-emergency medical transport services. Actions pertaining to the Department of Natural Resources begin on page 22. On pages 22 through 24, the subcommittee added language restricting funds pending a report on coal combustion byproducts and adopted 2 pieces of narrative requesting reports on deer management strategies and Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. In the Maryland Department of the Environment, on page 25, the subcommittee added language restricting funds pending a report on scrap tires and adopted narrative on how personnel expenditures are reported. And on page 27, in the Maryland Environmental Service, the subcommittee adopted narrative on a funding statement. Sections added by the subcommittee are included on pages 28 through 32 of the report. On page 28, the subcommittee added annual language restricting fundings pending a report on Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. At the bottom of page 29, the subcommittee restricted funds pending a report on fiscal stress being experienced by the Maryland Transportation Authority. On page 30, the subcommittee restricted funds pending submission of quarterly enforcement and inspection position information, which has been requested for the past few years. On page 32, the subcommittee restricted funds to be used only for the operations of the Maryland Transit Administration. Actions related to the BRFA are shown on page 33. The subcommittee adopted item 11, which repeals for fiscal 22 only the funding mandate for the Department of Natural Resources Fisheries Research and Development Fund, which has a sizable balance. We adopted item 102-DLS, authorizing the transfer of $5 million from the rate stabilization fund to the general fund. And we adopted item 303-APP, which is an additional requirement for the transfer from the Maryland National Capital Parking Planning Commission to the general fund. And the subcommittee rejected item 107-DLS, which would have repealed the fiscal 22 mandated funding level for operations of the Maryland Transit Administration. Thank you all once again, and I would move the adoption of the subcommittee report and actions on the BRFA.
Okay. Are there any items that members of the committee would like to have pulled out of the report? To have a separate vote? Any items? I see no hands up. Okay, so we'll vote on the report as given. Is that correct? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Please raise your hand if you're opposed. Very good, Mr. Chairman. Wait a minute. I think that was a mistake.
I don't think Delegate Lewis is opposed.
That was a mistake.
All right, thank you very much. And Delegate Corman, you did a great job. And Delegate Krim, you as well, and the whole subcommittee. So thank you. We're now going to move committee to two other areas that we're going to move to PAYGO that Delegate Barnes is going to lead us through. And then after that, we have full committee items that we're going to be walking through together and taking a vote on. Okay.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to start by thanking the members of the subcommittee, our great Vice Chair, Mark Chang, Delegate Wendell Weitzel, Delegate Grice, Delegate Haynes, Delegate Corman, Delegate Proctor, Delegate Resnick, and Delegate Young. I would also like to thank the Best Committee Counsel, Michelle Lambert, June Chung, and Ken Weaver, as well as our budget analysts who do an outstanding job, Sarah Baker, Andrew Gray, Emily Haskell, Laura Hyde, Ian Klein, Samuel Quist, and Kate Lee Cannon, who edited the document. Only a couple items here, Madam Chair, on for PAYGO. For item 21 on page 1, the subcommittee rejected the governor's provision to swap the GO bonds for special funds and support the general fund, and instead adopted the governor's revised provision striking the swap under item 21 admin alt. And for item 22, the subcommittee rejected the governor's alteration of the transfer tax repayment plan for Project Open Space. Instead, initially adopted item DLS alt, where the subcommittee adopted the DLS recommendation to repeal the transfer tax repayment requirement. But given the write-up, Madam Chair, I'd like to recommend that we reject, go back on that decision, reject the repeal, restore the Project Open Space funding. And I'd also suggest that when we get to full committee, we cut out half of that money for our critical maintenance backlog in our state parks. With that, or move the subcommittee report.
Delegate Beitzel, did you want to say?
Second.
Huh?
I would second that.
All right. All right. Any other items that we need to talk about? I don't see any hands raised, so there's been a motion favorable and a second on adopting the PAYGO report. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Raise your hand, please. Okay. We are now going to move to full committee item, which the analysts will walk through and introduce. Okay. Full committee items.
Yes, Madam Chair. I believe you should have all received a copy of the full committee decision document, which, as you all experienced with your subcommittee decisions, should have all of the requested color page items and any BRFA actions for your consideration. So our plan is we have all of the relevant analysts in the meeting with you, and they will be walking through page by page through budget code order to help you make your decisions.
Thank you.
We'll start on page 1 with Jason Kramer and the payments to civil divisions of the state.
Thank you, Rebecca. DLS recommends concurring and the agency concurs.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay.
All right, on page 2 is the Maryland General Assembly budget. DLS recommends concurring, agency concurs.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On page 3 is the State Board of Elections. The first DLS recommendation is to adopt narrative on local cost sharing. The agency concurs.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay.
The second DLS recommendation is to adopt narrative on quarterly reports on major IT project spending and development. The agency concurs in part. I'd like to direct your attention to color page number 2 on page, color page number 1 on page 5 that also proposes alternative narrative for quarterly IT project development and spending reports.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation and adopt the color page item.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay.
Okay, so then that brings us to DBM Secretary, beginning on page 7. So the first 9 items are actually all annual language that dictate requirements of reporting related to the budget bill. In the interest of time, you might want to consider these as one group.
Madam Chair, move to adopt items 1 through 9.
And I second.
Madam Chair, if we could just slow this one down just a little bit, because there are a couple line items here where the agency disagreed. And to be quite frank, we received this decision document at like 4:45 yesterday evening, which was a Sunday. And many of our staff, and they sent it to us today, and a lot of us are working on Monday. So many of us didn't have an opportunity to actually read this thing through line by line. So we may have to take a little bit of time here, if we may.
Okay. You want to?
If we could just discuss the things where the agencies disagree, if we can just get answers there, that would be great. Thank you.
That's fine. All right. Well, number 2, they disagreed.
It's only 2 and 3 where the agency disagreed. Items 1 and then 4 through 9 would all be annual language that the agency concurred with.
So it's only 2 and 3.
Okay, do we know why the agency disagreed on the, now these, I do believe that this actually came up in full committee. I know there's some of the language throughout this report that we're going to see that was added. Is that correct? That our committee hasn't seen yet, but this is one of those things that we have seen already. Is that correct?
Yeah, items 2 and 3 have been approved since at least fiscal 17 for both, fiscal 16 for one of them. So they are annual language for quite a number of years now. And then, yeah, there is 2 color page items for this agency, but they haven't been presented yet.
Sure. Okay. All right. I'm fine with these if everyone else is.
Okay. So we're going to do 1 through 9. Am I correct, Delegate Grice?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay.
Okay, so then that would take us to page 18. So here this is again annual language related to the budget amendment process. However, there is an alternative action for your consideration that begins on page 21. The actual change to this language is shown on page 23, and that's in bold if you wanted to see how that changes from the annual language shown as item 10. And so this alternative would mean that the new federal aid passed in the American Rescue Plan Act can only be added by amendment if BPW approves or if the funding supports one of the uses outlined in House Bill 898. And it also states that this section can't be waived under the governor's emergency powers during a declared state of emergency.
And Madam Chair, this was part of the discussion this past week. Is that correct with the governor's office?
It is.
And then do we know where the governor's office is on this at this point?
I will tell you that they very much so want to work with the House and Senate on a combined effort, and they very much know that we have these two bills that we could move that kind of put the barriers around the funding. Right now, we have been in discussions as late as noon today with the Department of Budget and Management and the governor's staff. And basically, there's absolutely general, great consensus about trying to work this out together. And I'll be very honest with you. There's one item that's very important to the governor that we have no problem with, but it's just trying to find out how much money that would occupy of the $3.9 billion. And we're trying to find that out, or to try to find a way to do a middle ground, or maybe do if they're allowed to use it for this, then we will, take money out of the other categories to a certain extent. But we are really at a very good place with our discussions. I wish I could say they're done, but I can't. But I think we feel confident they'll be done by midweek.
Okay.
And we all left the meeting at noon today saying we very much want to work together on this.
Right. Very good.
I
Thank
said to you before, in my mind, and this is me, Maggie McIntosh, we did the Relief Act. We want to do now the Recovery Act, which I think benefits us all. And in fact, it has very good items in there, like the repayment of the rainy day fund and, making sure we continue to support our retirement fund, repay a lot of the accounts that we borrow money from that we care about. And I think we can, and also help pay for not all of, but a good portion of the Relief Act. So I think we're on a very good path. Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if we may reject the DLS recommendation and adopt the color page item on page 21.
And
Second.
Thank you. All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay. Continue.
All right, so then at the bottom of page 24, item 11 is also annual language and the agency concurred.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
Actually, can we slow down on this one? Page 24.
Yep.
Okay, never mind. I'm sorry. This is in coordination with what we were just talking about. Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Raise your blue or yellow hand. Okay. We're now on page 25. Is that correct?
Actually, on to page 26.
26.
There is one BRFA action for your consideration related to DBM, and that action would reduce the number of required budget books that needed to be printed. And that's just our provision in the BRFA as introduced.
Okay.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Okay.
Second.
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Raise your hand. Okay.
So then the final action related to the DBM Secretary's Office is at the bottom of page 26 and on to 27. This item would restrict funding for light-duty vehicle purchases for the state fleet to be used on zero-emission vehicles with a process for DBM to approve exceptions for certain purchases when a zero-emission vehicle isn't available. And this language also includes a reporting requirement on vehicle purchases by fuel type by each agency and asks DBM to describe their criteria for granting exceptions to purchasing the zero-emission vehicles.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second. Second.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
One opposed. Yep, we got one opposed here. We got several opposed. Delegate Grice, Mangione, Novotny, Beitzel, Kettleman. Is that accurate?
Yes, ma'am, we have them all.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to make sure. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right.
That concludes.
I jumped on in there. Moving on to DBM personnel on page 28, items 1 through 3 are annual committee narrative on various health insurance and prescription drug plan reports that the agency concurs with.
Okay.
Madam Chair, move to adopt items 1 through 3.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Okay,
Item 4 on page 30 is DLS recommends adding committee narrative, requesting a report on the reverse auction implementation for the state's pharmacy benefits manager, and the agency concurs.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
Item 5 on this page is committee narrative requesting quarterly reporting on disaster relief funding, and the agency concurs.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Good. Anyone opposed? Nope. All right, keep going.
Item 6 on page 31, DLS recommends a cut in statewide expenses for salary purposes that are double budgeted for St. Mary's College.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
Second.
All right. The motion to reject, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
Item 7 on this page, DLS recommended deleting $2 million in funding for the Smart Work program. The agency concurred. However, on the next page, there are 2 color page items, color page items 1 and 2. The first would restrict $1.5 million of funding in this program for a grant to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. And the second item would provide $500,000 of this funding in grants to businesses affected by Purple Line construction.
okay,
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendations and adopt the 2 items on the color pages.
Second.
okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Madam Chair, if we could just better explain what we're doing. Are we actually cutting funding for the BSO here, or are we?
Now you're fencing off money for the BSO.
Okay, gotcha.
That's a
And the
fence.
same thing for, are we doing, what's the other item about the Purple Line? Or
Support small businesses along the Purple Line.
all right, I'm okay with that one.
Yeah.
I do love the BSO though, Madam Chair.
I know you do.
But I had some tough questions for them when they were in.
Good. I'm glad you did. I mean it. So is there anyone opposed to fencing off these 2 items?
I am.
Raise your hand. There could be opposition. Here we go. Okay. Got it. Very good. Thank you. We have 3 in opposition. Go ahead.
All right, item 8 on page 32, DLS recommended deleting a $2 million general fund deficiency appropriation for general COVID-19 relief. The agency concurred, and they concurred so much that they took care of it themselves in the supplemental budget. So you should reject this recommendation.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, next.
On to the next page, item 9, DLS recommended adding a section to the bill authorizing that would direct DBM to authorize the Injured Workers Insurance Fund to use up to $15 million in workers' compensation funding for settlement claims, and the agency concurred.
Okay,
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
Items 10 through 14, beginning on page 33, all the way through, I think, 39, are annual language that the agency concurred with.
Madam Chair, move to adopt annual languages, items 10 through 14.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
All right, that brings us to page 39 and a couple of BRFA actions related to this agency. BRFA action number 24 is in the BRFA as introduced. It would authorize a transfer of $30 million from the reserve account for unemployment insurance to the general fund. And just to be clear, this is not general unemployment insurance. This is the unemployment insurance fund for state employees.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right,
And item 106 DLS is a recommendation to reduce fiscal 2021 spending in the statewide program by $1.8 million in general funds due to excess funding for salary actions. And the agency concurred.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Wait,
Aye.
just a quick question. We're on page 40, correct? With the supplemental retirement contribution?
No, we haven't gotten there yet. That was
Oh, I'm
just page
sorry.
39.
Okay. Dead ahead. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we're on 40.
Yes, now to page 40 on the state retirement agency. Item number 1 is a recommendation to delete the $75 million in supplemental retirement contributions statewide. The agency disagreed.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
Okay,
Just as a discussion, if I may.
yes,
By doing this, it has helped our unfunded liabilities. Is that correct?
That's
yeah.
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
all right. So the motion is to reject.
Oh, we're rejecting. Okay. Sorry. I'm a little slow this evening.
That's okay. You can be slow this evening. So all those in favor of rejecting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay,
And then the next item is a BRFA recommendation, and this is the same recommendation except pertaining to fiscal 2021 to delete the 21 amount of $75 million in supplemental retirement contributions. And the agency disagreed.
Madam Chair, move to reject.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
On to page 41, item number 2, DLS recommended adding committee narrative requesting a report on investment division personnel costs, and the agency concurred.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay,
And one final BRFA action for the retirement agency, item 33 in the BRFA as introduced, adds a provision that would allow retired employees to come back to work for the Department of Health or the Department of Labor without it negatively affecting their pension benefits.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
And page 42 in the Maryland supplemental retirement plans, DLS recommended concurring and the agency concurred.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
On page 43, start several actions that pertain to the Maryland Aid to Education budget. These are all additional items that are for your consideration. So item number 1, CP1, is funding that was identified as being allocated to schools that are closing at the conclusion of the 2020-2021 school year. And so this language would redirect that the funding allocated for those schools be reapplied and redistributed to schools that aren't closing. In addition, it also expresses the intent that about $747,000 in funding be reverted to fiscal 2021.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
all right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, next.
At the bottom of page 43, CP2 would restrict funding in the operating budget within the Blueprint Fund to be distributed in accordance with a section in the Kerwin 2.0 bill, SB 965 or HB 1372, contingent on enactment of the bill. This is funding specifically allocated for supplemental instruction and tutoring.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
On page 44, item CP3, this is language that would authorize the governor to bring in a budget amendment to expend Blueprint funds in fiscal 2022 for a variety of initiatives as established in Chapter 36 of 2021, including funding for the Accountability and Implementation Board, model curriculum and instructional materials, and the remaining items you see in the language.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay,
At the bottom of page 44, item CP4, there was $45 million allocated in the supplemental budget for the concentration of poverty grants. This language is attached to that item, and it identifies there were 12 schools that received a grant in fiscal 2021 that are not part of the allocation in fiscal 2022. So what this language does is it uses a portion of that $45 million in order to ensure that those schools are included in the fiscal 2022 allocation. And it requires that the remainder of the $42 million of the appropriation be allocated as per pupil grants.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right,
The next several items, all CP5 all the way through CP9, all are language that would be attached to supplemental budget funding for a variety of initiatives, summer school programs, programs to address trauma and behavioral health issues, supplemental instruction. This is just language that ties up the funding so that it is allocated and used in accordance with the allocations prescribed by the legislature planned for the Kerwin 2.0 legislation.
right,
Madam Chair, move to adopt the language on color pages 5 through 9.
Second.
okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay,
Moving forward to page 47, the last item in the aid to education budget, CP10. This is the same language that makes the allocation contingent on the allocations laid out in the Kerwin legislation that you're considering. But I would just draw to your attention that there is an additional provision. This is $10 million that's allocated in the supplemental budget for the reopening of schools. And so this additional provision just says that priority should be given to schools that have a plan for reopening.
absolutely.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Second.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay,
The Board of Public Works is on page 48. The first item is a $2 million reduction to debt service.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay,
There's also BRFA action number 17 for the public debt. What this does is it changes allowable uses and clarifies allowable uses of bond premiums. There's House Bill 887, which is passed, which does this also right now.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
This makes it consistent with that bill, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I have to vote against it because I voted against that bill.
Okay,
I don't think it's a big deal, but
all right. Anyone else want to vote against this? Please raise your hand.
We have Delegate Grice and Delegate Mangione in the unfavorable.
Okay. All right, let's keep moving.
Okay, on page 49 are the actions for the State Reserve Fund. Item number 1, DLS recommended annual narrative that would provide a report on repayments made to the catastrophic event account and the SWMOBA account. The agency concurred.
Madam Chair, move to adopt.
Okay.
Second.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Okay, at the bottom of page 49, the governor's BRFA, as introduced, would take the $80 million in anticipated funding associated with the revenue volatility provision and reduce that and send those funds to the general fund instead. There was a request for a color page item, which is at the top of page 50 for you to consider. This item would have you rejecting the governor's provision and instead including a provision in the BRFA that would, if the revenues materialize, provide a 4.5% COLA to members of the AFSCME.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation and adopt the color page.
Second.
Madam Chair,
Any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just would like to clarify with the analyst. So if we wanted to continue hazard pay for essential state workers, we could use federal relief funds for that. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. It is anticipated that the stimulus funding will be available for that purpose.
That's great news. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And all those in favor of this motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Madam Chair, in the opposition, we have Delegate Kittleman, Delegate Weitzel, Delegate Grice, Delegate Novotny, and Delegate Mangione.
Okay, that's correct. We can move on.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I ask a clarification? The vote's taken, but on page 50, is the 4.5% COLA for all AFSCME members or just particular segments?
I think
I believe the only affiliate that would be included is the MTA police, and that's because they have their own process for allocating COLAs.
Okay, so that's what I thought it was 4.5 for everyone. Okay, that's fine. So just one branch. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, on page 50, the governor's BRFA as introduced included a provision that would reduce the appropriation to the rainy day fund down to a 5% fund balance, so a reduction of about $422 million.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
just a question. So does this decision that we're making increase or decrease our leave with the fund balance?
It will increase the fund balance in the rainy day fund.
Perfect, thank you.
Good government. Next.
Okay, item number 15 proposed a contingent reduction to reduce the OPEB and pension sweepers by $25 million each, sending a total of $50 million to the general fund.
Madam Chair, move to reject the DLS recommendation.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay,
Item number 29 at the bottom of page 50 was a provision that the governor's birth included that would allow state agencies to borrow against the local income tax reserve fund in order to cover forward fund expenses that are anticipated to be reimbursed when we receive FEMA disaster relief funds at some point in the future.
Madam Chair, move to reject.
Second.
okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
On page 51, this is a color page item, CP2. This is the language that I believe Delegate Barnes referenced in his PAGO speech. The language that you see before you would redirect the restored program open space payment specifically for critical maintenance projects in its entirety. I believe that Delegate Barnes had referenced wanting to allocate half of the repayment for the purpose of critical maintenance.
Madam Chair, move to amend the language to restrict half of the repayment for critical maintenance.
Second.
okay,
Third.
any discussion? Delegate Weitzel, you fine with that? We were,
I third that.
okay, all right, very good. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay,
The final action for your consideration is on page 52. This is an additional BRFA provision that would just provide clarification primarily at the request of SDAT. There was, statute was amended last session for how country clubs and golf courses are assessed by SDAT. And they had indicated the need for some clarification in the statute to make that process easier for them.
okay,
Madam Chair, move to adopt the birth action.
Second.
okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? That's it, right?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
move to move the budget and birth as amended.
Second. Second.
okay, here's the big vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed to the budget as presented? We have one in opposition, Delegate Mangione. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay,
Madam Chair, that's what I confirm.
okay, thank you very much. Listen, before we adjourn, let me thank the whole committee and obviously, especially subcommittee chairs. I'm going to be making a speech, as you know, in a couple of days on the floor, and I'll try to thank everybody. But I do want to say this, that we could not in this unusual year have made it through without the help of, one, the Speaker's office, Alex Hughes and Matt Jackson, who thought he was getting away from appropriations, but we wouldn't let him. But, you know, in particular, DLS, the budget office, and our great analysts. I mean, there's no way that we could have done this without their professional work and just getting budget items to us, making sure that we could do everything virtually. It was really important. And I have to call out, of course, David Romans, who's on this call, Rebecca, and Simon. In particular, the three of you who managed the workflow for all of us and managed the documents. I can't thank you enough for your time, your effort, your professionalism, and you provided to this committee this year, and to all of the analysts. We really appreciate your work this year so much. Somehow, I'm not going to say it was effortless, but I do think that we have made it through, kind of taking our time and trying to give each other, time to process a lot of the information virtually that we're not used to doing. And then finally, we have a rock star on our committee, and her name is Michelle Lambert. We certainly are so happy to have June Chung and Ken Weaver, who have joined us. They have been terrific this year and guiding all of the subcommittees through. So the budget will be on the floor Wednesday, okay? I'm very proud of this budget. I'm proud of all of you. And so with that, I thank you. And everybody have a good rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you.